Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at 1991 and 1992 Studio baseball cards by Donruss. For me, it's kind of difficult to remember that Donruss was actually a pretty innovative company. The reason for that is I grew up in the world of football cards and in basketball cards, and both of those spaces were incredibly innovative. In the case of basketball, they were basically inventing themselves in the 90s, and so they were inventing new ways to take the really dynamic quality of the sport and have fun with it. In the case of football, they felt like they had something to prove, but not in terms of against anybody else, but against themselves. See, that's the nature of the sport. The sport is all about reinvention. It's about new things coming from places you hadn't anticipated. And so football had to create its own world in sports that had always been baseball. And the 1990s was where they just opened the doors and said, hey, anybody who wants to come, come. And there was a lot of competition. There was a lot of innovation. And so in those spaces, innovation takes on the true meaning of the term. I mean, you see stuff going on in football and basketball that would basically cause baseball to shudder. Because baseball is all about tradition. That's the thing. Baseball, the numbers that Walter Johnson put up, those numbers still hold up. Baseball is about everybody doing the same thing everybody's ever done, and you're just continuing a legacy. But there's also this expectation that everybody in baseball is kind of like a god in a way. So it's hero worship. That's what baseball cards are. They're very, very simple. They're the same thing they've been. They're the same thing they will always be. And so innovation in baseball is very rare because you don't want to go and do something too crazy and wild because you're going to lose the audience. The audience comes in with something in their mind, something that they expect, and if they don't get that, it's a really tough sell. So if you're going to innovate in baseball, you have to do it in a way that feels comfortable to the audience. And that's why 1988 Score worked, because it was pushing the boundaries of cards, but it wasn't going so far out on a limb that people would feel uncomfortable with it. Well, Donruss had a tendency to do some fun little things here and there that pushed the envelope, but it didn't push the boundaries. And in 1990, they accomplished something that nobody else had ever, well, only one company had tried, but they had failed. And that was to create a second brand that was a premium brand. Topps had tried that in 1989, did not work. So in 1990, Donruss created a premium brand to compete with Upper Deck. And there were other premium brands at the time, but none of them were a second brand by a company. Donruss nailed it. They actually pulled it off. And by 1991, everybody did that. But in 1991, Donruss wasn't ready to quit because all through the 1980s, there had been these specialty sets, little novelty sets that were done with, you would get them in packs. Sometimes they would be sold just in complete set form, but usually in packs. And in those packs, they would have a small set, maybe multiple sets, but usually it was a small set. And it was a fun little exploration of cards, exploration of the sport. Well, Donruss decided, why not do that with a full-blown set? Let's really take it seriously and make a full set, in this case 264 cards, and really own it. And so they created a set called Studio. Now, Studio, the reason that Studio is so significant is in 1991, there were two companies that had three different brands that they were selling. Topps made its Stadium Club set, which enabled it to finally be successful in creating a premium brand, but then Bowman was still just kind of there. And so here with Donruss, they had their regular brand, they had their premium brand, which everybody else was doing, but then in the middle, they made a card set just for the sake of making a card set. That's what Studio was. This would be a very common thing in the mid-90s, but here in 1991, this was, I won't say it was unheard of, because again, we'd been seeing this in small set form previous to this, but this was a major affair. This was a full-blown set. And so Studio occupied a place that was not confined. That was the beauty of it. It was a set that was designed for basic collectors, just kids collecting cards, worshiping baseball players, and also for high-end collectors. It's a serious card set. It did both functions at the same time. So the cards that they created, there's a header card at the beginning of the set, which is pretty cool. They were really kind of celebrating this set. The header card has a cranberry color for most of the card, a big logo in the middle, but the cranberry finish has kind of a metallic quality, so there's a rich quality to it. This is not a full gloss card. This is kind of a semi-gloss card. And on the card back, you'll notice something. It's black and white. It's weird about this card set. It has a full finish for the front, kind of a glossy finish on the front, but on the card back, it's black and white like it's a test set. Understand, these are not preview cards, these are not promo cards. This is the way the card set was done. Very unusual approach. And here on the header card, this is an unnumbered card, and it basically is a little explanation of why the set was made, why they made Donruss Studio, which again is kind of neat. They're really doing a good job of promoting this as a brand new idea, a fun new idea. And in baseball, this set was perfect because when you get to the main cards, you can see that they're portraits. Donruss Studio Portrait is a set that would come out years and years later, but right from the beginning, Studio was portraits of players. So all of the other cards for their players were action shots or off the field shots. Basically, they're shots related to the game. But rarely would you see cards where somebody would just sit down and have a formal shot. And usually it was a mug shot. So here in 1991, Donruss went out and they made studio shots of all the players, 260 of them. And these shots are really nice. I mean, they have the school portrait backdrop behind them, but the players are all in their uniform. So this looks like a professional presentation of the player as you know him. And for kids, that was great because, again, it's about hero worship. And so here's a great shot of the player, very straightforward, right in front of you. And then on the card back, they talk about, it's not the normal statistics. It's kind of talking about the player in a more, in a personal way. So, I mean, it's still mainly about the career, but still it is done in a way that is focused on getting to know the player. That's the model of the card. And on the card front, they used black and white shots of the players, which made a really, really strong presentation of each player. When you look at this card, even though it has that cranberry border, which is a very distinct element, it's all about the image in the middle, and the image reads beautifully. In fact, you might not have even noticed the studio logo is some yellow text that's up in the corner. It basically kind of disappears into the card. So they were incredibly successful in the card they made. Again, this is a card designed for kids, but it's also designed to speak to high-end collectors. And setting aside the black and white and matte finish, I might add, back of the card, it really did do heavy lifting on both sides. So really cool concept. And some of these shots are really, really impressive. There were some really nice shots. Most of them are just really good, but a few really do hit a high mark. The set didn't have any subsets, but they did have the opportunity to play a couple of tricks in the set. One of them was to have a Black & Decker card, and this is basically the pitching catching combination of Mr. Decker and Mr. Black, or Mr. Black and Mr. Decker, however you want to look at it. And it was just fun. I mean, why wouldn't they bother to go ahead and do this? So they did. But of more note is Jimmy Reese. Jimmy Reese was a conditioning coach with the California Angels, but more significantly, he'd been in the league a while. How long? He'd been a roommate of Babe Ruth. So this is a guy who'd been in the league for 74 years. So why not take advantage of that? We're talking about the actual individuals in sports. Why not show a guy who'd been around for nearly 3/4 of a century? So these two cards are kind of seated in there, but they fit in with the rest. I mean, they're not special cards. They're just special opportunities with regular cards. Jimmy Reese, he looks like one of the players. So the set was about as simple as it could possibly be. It is a simple set of portraits. That's it. 260 portraits of players. The only addition to the set was the checklist. Now in Leaf they had launched these checklists where they had a player on the front, part of a checklist, and then on the back they had the rest of the checklist. Well, here in Donruss Studio they did the exact same thing, except instead of players they used managers. So these are the only managers in the set. The card again has the cranberry border, it has a really nice shot of the manager, and then it has a partial checklist on the front, and on the back the checklist continues. And there's obviously a lot more room because it's just that simple white back of the card. And the three coaches that they chose World Series winning coaches. So obviously Tony La Russa, but they also had Sparky Anderson and they had Tommy Lasorda. So those three coaches were the only true difference to this card set. Otherwise, it's just a straight card set. And this was Donruss 1991, and they were still doing their puzzle pieces. In this case, it was Rod Carew, and that's what the puzzle pieces were. But they didn't even bother to make these shiny like they had done with the Leaf cards. So these were not chromed, they were just straightforward puzzle pieces. The only other thing they did about the set was they wanted to promote the set. So they made a set of preview cards, 17 cards, and these cards were available in Donruss complete sets. So if you got a certain Donruss complete set, it had some of these cards in it. And the preview cards are identical to the regular cards in the set. It's just that on the back, it has numbered of 17 instead of the actual number in the card set. That's the only thing. They don't even bother to say that it's a preview set. But those cards were the only other thing. It was about as basic and straightforward as it could get, but that was 1991. That's how you did cards. And the card set was a brilliant concept that actually worked really well. So, 1992, they got to do the same thing. And what they wanted to do in 92 was, the same thing, but you can't make the same card. So, here with the header card, you can see that they did the exact same thing. They did change the logo, so they got rid of a baseball, replaced it with a base, but they went with a gold or a goldish, bronzish, but really a gold coloration on the outside, again with the kind of metallic quality that the previous year had. And on the back, you'll notice, hey, it's in color now. So that was a great thing. Here now, finally, these cards do have color on the back, and there's a watermark. It's a watermark that you see only when light shines right over the studio. So every single card has that. But the back does not have a glossy finish. It has the same finish that like a Pro Set card or an Ultra 1991 Ultra card would have. It is a professional done card back. It's not the cardboard that we'd had in the past. And so it wasn't a matte finish, but it wasn't a glossy finish, which means these cards still are not going to be sticking together, but the watermark comes through as an effect on the card back. So the card back looks and feels professional. Again, the header card has no number, and again, it kind of talks about the set. So when we launch into the set, we get to finally see what they did. And what they did was they shrunk the image down a little bit, which makes it now feel like a hole in the card, as opposed to the dominance of the card. The studio logo the studio text is now taken away, and the logo is kind of parked down the corner, which is an improvement, I think. But the big thing you'll notice is the card is mainly the background image, which is a black and white shot of the player in kind of a stipple or an old effect of an image, but it's black and white. And then down at the bottom, you can see that they have a small cutout portrait of the player. And the problem is that the black and white image is so dominant, and then the portrait is not well lit, and so it kind of disappears into the card. So when you look at the card, all you see is the background, you don't see the portrait. Now, the portraits aren't quite as exciting as they had been in the previous year. They're not quite as well done. They are in color, which is nice, but this card works a lot better for the card background. That's really the dominance of the card, and that looks good. And the portrait, it almost gets in the way. Not quite, but it doesn't work. So the idea of this card was kind of a jumbled mess. Even on the card back, where now it's in color so it looks more professional, it lacks the interest that they had managed to pull off in the previous year. So here is a card set where they came out and they came up with the idea of, let's do the same thing but improve it. And in trying to improve it, they ended up pulling the card set back a little bit. They were not as successful. Kind of like they didn't know what they were doing beforehand and stumbled into greatness. And then when they tried, they got in their own way. Some of the portraits do look pretty decent, but unfortunately, they just lack the interest of the previous year. The set does again have only the checklist for any change up of the pace, and in this case, the checklists are done of Hall of Fame inductees. So 1991, Rod Carew was inducted into the Hall of Fame, so he has one of the checklists. They also have 1989's inductee Red Schoendienst, and then in 1987, Billy Williams made the Hall of Fame. So those were the three players that they had on the checklist. Otherwise, it's basically the same, but there is one interesting note, which is that on the last checklist, it doesn't end with 263. They have card number 264, which is the header card. Now, the header card does not have a number on it, but they tacked it on at the end as 264, which makes no sense to me. It should be card 0 up the front, but it does show up on the checklist, which is kind of interesting. So officially, the checklist in 1992 is card number 264. Thankfully for 1992, Donruss was getting away from the puzzles, so that meant we had an actual insert set. And for here, it was their Heritage Series. The Heritage Series cards are glossy cards with a dark teal border and a sepia image of a player dressed in an old style uniform for the team. So in this case, we have Jose Canseco, who is wearing a Philadelphia A's jersey from back in the 1920s. And so you can see the old Yankees and whatever team the player happens to be on. And this set was really cool. And old-timey is the best way to describe it. This is not the way it would have looked in the 20s, but it has that feel, and it's a gorgeous card. But the thing that's most impressive about this card is on the card front, they have copper foil for the text up at the top, but mainly for the corners that the picture kind of nestles into. And which, this is all one smooth card, but the bronze foil, this was still very new to cards. In 1991, Stadium Club had basically kicked off gold foil on cards. So here in 1992, only a couple of companies ever bothered to put foil, gold or any other type of foil, onto their cards. And so these cards were very, very bold. They came through beautifully. The teal color, gorgeous. The subdued quality of the card, everything about the card was great, but that foil really carried through. And it looks great even today. They would do this again in 1993, and it wouldn't look, it looked more, it's kind of like what happened between 91 and 92 with the main set. That kind of happened here with these cards. But I'm not going to talk about 1993 here. I'm only focusing on 91 and 92. So I will note that the only other thing to talk about here is that they did do another preview set for the 1992 set. These cards are, they're basically done the same way, except it's a 22 card set. And so on the card back, the only difference on these cards is the numbered of 22, but also it does say preview on these cards. But that is all there is about these two sets, because they're very simple, but they were very innovative, and they were a brilliant concept. Unfortunately, the concept had limits, because you do it once, kind of like with Proline, which did the same thing in 1991. They did portraits of players. Okay, once you've done them once, what do you do the next year? So Proline had to reinvent itself to evolve into something else, just by nature. Studio wanted to do the same thing every year. How do you do it different? They tried in 1992, it didn't work. So in 1993, they wanted to use the same model, but they would have to reinvent the model, which makes this a great time to step aside and say, okay, we're going to look at 93, 94, 95, look at that in a separate video and see what they came up with in their new second life. Here with these two sets, this is very distinctive, so I thought it'd work very well in a combination. And it helps you to get a feel for the distinction and the real impressive nature of these cards. And so I hope that you've learned some things in this video. I hope that you're definitely going to look for the video for 1993 through 95 when that comes out. If you haven't perused my channel, definitely check out the other videos. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.